What was I doing this morning? I got up uncharacteristically late because I had been up uncharacteristically late the night before, and I slept in, and then I made myself a coffee. I have a little hand grinder and a pour-over kit that I take with me when I travel, and I listened to music and wrote a couple emails and then walked to get a coffee and came here. So pretty quiet. Given that I have children age 6 and 4.5, it was a very quiet morning. We're at the Blue Bottle Coffee Cafe on Sansom Street, temporarily closed due to the coronavirus. It was the West Coast HQ of the Standard Oil Company in the early part of the 20th century, so it's a beautiful, generously proportioned building, quite opulent in materials, not super opulent in scale. It's not a large building. And this was an early collaboration with the architects BCJ. And what we wanted to achieve was this insertion of old world materials, walnut and marble, but inserted in quite a modern way in this shell, this beautiful shell of an early 20th century building. Yeah, I'm James Freeman. I founded Blue Bottle Coffee Company in 2002. That is an interesting question. Yeah, 19 years later. My role is pretty slight. I still am involved with the company. I am working on maybe a cafe prototype that maybe will be introduced in the Arts District in Los Angeles. I keep in touch with a few treasured colleagues immersed in the minutiae of Blue Bottle. I have influence without authority right now, and that's not the easiest thing to have. Yeah, that's my somewhat tenuous, somewhat uneasy position at Blue Bottle. Everything's temporary, right? Life is temporary. This I try, as I told you before, this is a question of how does a brand carry meaning? How does a brand become a popular brand in people's eyes? How does it become special and interesting to people? And I actually did think about this question a fair amount as I was coming up here from Southern California. And I think people react to a personal expression, even if they don't see what's personal. I think you can feel it. It's a little bit like gravity. If like the gravity of the moon, you just feel lighter, apparently. You can jump up higher, you can bounce farther. You don't feel as weighed down. And I think especially with retail spaces, people feel that personal expression. They don't know quite how to articulate it sometimes, and sometimes the people who are responsible for producing it don't quite know how to articulate it. But I think there's this feeling that comes from like a very pure, very personal place. There's a political expression in the United States that I kind of like to paraphrase, and the way I tell it is brands are founded in poetry and scaled in prose. And so I think people feel that poetry, and the task obviously is to keep as much of that poetry in a space, in a company, in a brand for as long as possible. I have a lot of opinions about hospitality. I think the absence of it is sad. I think the presence of it is hard. The better the hospitality, the more you think this is the way it should always be. So it's tricky to execute. If you see somebody trying to give good hospitality, that's not as special or important or magical as somebody who's not trying that hard but doing it. It's very interesting. The last 3 or 4 years I've been studying Muay Thai, and still quite a beginner, but it's been very important to me during this time. And there's this sense of when you're doing things right, when your balance is right, when your body is working together, it's actually much easier to hit harder. It's actually much easier. You're burning fewer calories. It's much easier to be better when your body isn't working as hard, when it's just sort of all the parts are working together and your balance is good. So I think about that in terms of hospitality, that it should, if you're doing it right, it's easy and it flows. But there's many, many years of preparation you have to undergo in order to do it right, both in the operational side in terms of training, and then on the personal side, this person who is trying to give hospitality. Well, back when I was really responsible for designing the shops, and every little micro expression of experience was being weighed and evaluated, it was very important. The materials of the doorknob or the handle were very important to me. We had a beautiful cafe in Oakland, 42nd and Broadway, and I remember being out there with the architects and like wrapping this doorknob and a few different things, just like so we could touch what it meant to touch. Some, the regulatory environment is such that you don't have as much control over the doorknob, for example. But people walk in and they want to feel something. They don't want to feel like they're walking into a 7-Eleven, right? So how that feeling is managed is very important. It starts with the progression from the outside to the inside. How have you paved the way? How have you borrowed materials from the outside to make people feel like they're not going into some scary dark tunnel? So that's important. And then balancing the light, so it's not like super bright outside and then dark inside. Balancing the smells. Does it smell like a mop bucket and a dish room, or does it smell like waffles and coffee being ground? And then there's the first touch. Can they see a word that they recognize? Latte. Very early, because that's reassuring to see something you recognize. Does somebody greet them when they walk in and make them feel, because a lot of people, especially in coffee, walk in by themselves, and in the morning they walk in by themselves and they haven't had coffee yet. So that's a very, very vulnerable state, to be alone and not have had coffee. It's like, what's worse, to be naked, right? So, to sort of swaddle that vulnerability in types of care about how it smells, how it looks, how you're greeted, what you see, what you recognize, those were very important criteria for me to think about when we were designing a shop. Oh yeah. I mean, it started at the farmer's market. My connection to the brand was, I was the brand. It was me and a roaster and an espresso cart, and then hired a couple baristas, and then, the kiosk on Linden Street. So my connection to the brand was, it was this expression of my personality, and it was tremendously intoxicating to have like my personality be so celebrated, praise is dangerous. Praise is as dangerous as condemnation, I think, as well. So you get a little drunk on this fog of praise and self-deception, right? But as I've progressed through it, I've gone from being in control of everything to being in control of fewer and fewer things. Now I'm in control of, basically nothing except sort of the discourse I have with a few people that I choose to stay in touch with. But it changes. I've got a teenager, I've got an 18-year-old, and he doesn't need me to wipe his butt, right? He would prefer that I not. So, I have to just let Blue Bottle be what it is. I can't force it to be what it used to be, even though there's sometimes I think I would wish to do so. I was so resistant to advice. I've received so much advice from so many people, like most of it in the category of how misguided my venture was. So that kind of encouraged me to continue not taking advice. I was a classical musician before I started, and it's a very mentor-driven culture of classical music. You have your teacher, and your teacher is very much responsible for your success. It's very parental. If your teacher likes you, then that feels great. If your teacher pats you on the head and says you've done a good job, that means a lot. And so this concept of mentorship was something I really wanted to push against when I started coffee. I didn't want mentors. I didn't seek out mentors. I wanted to make my mistakes myself and fail myself. So yeah, I wasn't interested in advice. I mean, who knows, maybe I would have been better off taking a little bit more, but it's just, especially the first 5 years or so, I was not interested in advice. Oh God, that's a question. I think I have. I think this is the time for me, especially with coronavirus, you know, Blue Bottle spreading its wings, and the Nestle ownership. I think that's been a very, very big struggle for me because, you know, I write somebody with my email, james@bluebottlecoffee.com, and it's like, imagine that, there is a table for two. You know, it's like, oh, right this way. You know, there's a lot of cultural cachet that comes with being the founder of Blue Bottle Coffee, but I think it's been weighing on me, I think, a little too heavily, and I just have to let Blue Bottle spread its wings for a while. I wasn't sure if I thought thought up Blue Bottle Coffee or Blue Bottle Coffee thought up me. So, you know, I think this is the year, as I'm getting towards the 20th anniversary, I just have to move past that. I've got some ideas about what I want to do next and who I want to do it with. And I have to sort of treasure these 20 years, not be resentful or, you know, wistful. I suppose I could be wistful. I'll allow myself wistfulness or poignancy. Totally, yeah, both for good or ill. You know, it's tremendously intoxicating to be riding this wave and have so much praise, so much positive feedback. And, you know, there were things, people, experiences that got lost along the way. So I think, you know, there's a little bit of cleanup I need to do in my life. So this will be a good time to do that. That's interesting. First of all, congratulations, Magazine B. 10 years is a very good run. I remember seeing, I think the Ace Hotel issue came out a year or two before the Blue Bottle issue. And I remember just like doing this deep dive into, because I was a big fan of the Ace Hotel back in the day, doing this deep dive into the magazine, learning things, but also think like, oh, this is so cool. I wonder if I will ever be in the pages of this magazine someday. So it was tremendously validating when, sure enough, they asked if they could do an issue on Blue Bottle. Yeah, after this. Back to Santa Barbara Airport, which is an adorable, pokey little airport, and then I'll be whisked east to Ojai. It's about an hour away.
Well, I'll let you catch that flight.
All right, very good. That's it? We're done? Very good. Thank you so much. You made it easy.
You too.